All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. So I want to first say thanks for joining us today, and we've got a really special webinar put together here today for everyone. So a little bit different than our usual webinars. I'm joined today by Andrew Mason from Microsoft. Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming. This is going to be an exciting one, I think. So today our webinar is centered around the topic of Nano Server, new Windows Server installation option introduced in Windows Server 2016. And Andrew here works with the Nano Server team, correct, Andrew?
That is correct. Yes, I'm on the program management side.
Perfect, perfect. So I mean, you're not going to find a better resource on all things Nano Server than Andrew here. So I'm really excited about having the opportunity to do this webinar for everybody today. So let's get started with our agenda for the day. If you want to advance the slide there, Andrew. Thank you, sir. So real brief agenda here. So I mean, we're just going to do some introductions of, myself, Andrew, the sponsor, Altaro Software, and then Andrew's going to kind of set the stage for us. In past Altaro webinars, we've done about 40 minutes of content and maybe 10 minutes of Q&A. Really what we're going to focus on today is about 20 minutes of content just to set the stage of why Nano Server, what is Nano Server, what are the use cases, and then we're going to open it up for a giant Q&A session basically, so you can get any question you have about Nano Server answered today. So yeah, we'll start with some introductions here. So first off, my name is Andy Serwich. I'm a technical evangelist with Altaro Software. I'm also a Microsoft Cloud and Data Center Management MVP. And I've been around the industry for 14 plus years now. Worked for managed services providers. I've worked for internal IT departments. My focus has always been in virtualization, cloud services, infrastructure, the Microsoft server stack. If you're interested in following me on Twitter, I've got my Twitter handle there in the lower left-hand corner. And also, I do a lot of blogging on Altaro's blog at www.altaro.com/hyper-v. And I'll turn it over to you, Andrew, so you can do your introduction.
Thanks. And my name's Andrew Mason. I'm a Principal PM Manager at Microsoft in the Windows and Devices group. And the team I'm on is the program management team for Nano Server. And I was actually the first program manager on Nano Server and back in the day, first program manager for Server Core. So I've been at this for a while, trying to make Windows Server smaller and leaner and faster. And then I've been involved in Windows Server in one way or another since the early days of NT3.1, so I've been at Microsoft for quite a while now. And my Twitter's down at the bottom, and also the link to the Nano Server blog. And then the last slide I have is a bunch of links to other resources, the TechNet sites, and some other resources that you can use.
Hey, sounds good. Appreciate that, Andrew. And just a real quick word about the sponsor, Altaro Software, whom I work for. We're a fast-growing developer of user-friendly backup solutions that are designed for the SMB and the mid-market space. We're trusted by 30,000 plus customers, and our flagship product is Altaro VM Backup. If you're interested in checking out, a little bit more information about that product, you can just go to altaro.com/vm-backup, and we've got all kinds of information out there. So. At this point, the next thing I wanted to do is just real quick talk about, the Q&A that we've got coming up at the end of this webinar. So as we kind of progress through the webinar today, feel free to use the questions form inside of the GoToWebinar UI as we go through slides. And what we'll do is at the end, after we've talked about Nano Server for about 15-20 minutes here, I'll start going through those questions, and we'll be presenting them to Andrew as we move through the Q&A later. So again, feel free to start asking those questions now if you'd like. If there's a question that we don't get to today because of time constraints, we always do a webinar follow-up post out at altaro.com/hyper-v. And also, if you want to sign up for notifications to be notified when that post is ready, you can go to altaro.com/hyper-v/sign-up. in order to sign up for those notifications. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, and he can give us a kind of a primer and tell us why Nano Server and why it's such an awesome installation option.
Thank you very much, Andy. So I just have a few slides to talk about some high-level aspects of Nano Server to give you sort of a high-level crash course. And then, like I said, I've got a slide at the end that links off to a bunch more resources where you can get more details. But Nano Server has really been focused on the cloud and providing just enough operating system for your host, guest, and container runtime. And to that, as you'll see, as Andy mentioned, there are 3 installation options in Windows Server 2016. There's Server with a desktop experience that has the full GUI, allows you to run, third-party applications that require a UI. It gives you the RDS host experience, so you can have a very client-like experience through RDS. There's Server Core that lets you run a lot of your existing workloads that you typically run in a virtual machine today, provides some lower maintenance and lower cost to you. And then there's Nano Server, where it's really focused on your modern applications written to the cloud patterns and containers. So not exactly to scale there, but you can see how each of those gets smaller as you go down the line there. So Server with a desktop is pretty big because it has the full UI and all the functionality of client plus the server roles. Whereas Server Core, we've removed a bunch of the UI, and then Nano Server, we've taken a step further and gotten it much smaller. I've got some numbers later on that. And so Nano Server really gives you the ability to have higher density, reduce your attack surface and servicing requirements for your cloud-based apps. So it is great for your cloud infrastructure, so as virtualization host, so running Hyper-V guests or containers on top of it, and it's ideal for your next generation apps. So we've built it specifically for containers. As we go forward, we're going to keep trying to optimize it more and more for containers, and we do have a full developer experience for Nano Server. I'll talk a bit more about that in an upcoming slide. But Nano Server is really, like I said, cloud ready. It follows a just enough OS model. So unlike Server and Server Core, where all the roles and features live in the side-by-side folder and are sitting out there on your disk and taking up storage, we've separated all those in Nano Server. So they install more like apps. So if you're never going to use clustering with your Nano Server environment, you never have to have the cluster bits anywhere in your image. And the roles and features we have in Server 2016 are Hyper-V, scale-out file server, IIS, DNS server, and clustering. And then we have some of the supporting pieces like Windows Defender, TPM support, software inventory logging, PowerShell and PowerShell DSC. And then for running apps, we have support for .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. Now, Nano Server has full driver support, so you don't need a different driver to work with Nano Server. As long as you have a driver that works with Server 2016 and is certified for that, it will work with Nano Server. The one difference would be the installation. So if you get it from your vendor, the downloads in MSI, you'll have to extract that on another machine because you need the inf and sys files, and then you inject them in your Nano Server image. Anti-malware Defender is available for Nano Server as well, but again, it's that just enough OS model, rather than having it installed by default and something you can disable and consuming space in your image, we've made it optional. So if you're going to use a third-party anti-malware, you don't have to ever have Defender bits in your image. And then System Center, Virtual Machine Manager, and Operations Manager, there are agents available for both of those that install on Nano Server. So it will plug into your System Center environment. Then as far as managing Nano Server goes, it is all remote. So Nano Server is, like I said earlier, very small. We'll see some numbers in a few minutes, but it is completely headless. So unlike Server Core, where you can use RDS to connect into the machine remotely, there is no RDS in Nano Server. So you have to use either your GUIs remotely, or you can use PowerShell remoting, as well as there's an open SSH available on GitHub that you can download and install. And so the key thing with Nano Server is, when you hear it referred to as headless, is that doesn't mean you have to manage it from the command line. All your existing GUI tools can connect up and manage Nano Server as long as whatever they're trying to manage exists in Nano Server. So like Server Manager can connect and manage it. If you're using it as a Hyper-V host, Hyper-V Manager can connect and manage it. Same with Cluster Manager. And then some of the core MMCs like Event Viewer and things like that can connect up. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, Virtual Machine Manager and Operation Managers both have agents for it, so you can use those UIs remotely. And then, of course, we do have PowerShell Core, so you can use PowerShell remoting to connect up to Nano Server and use PowerShell commandlets to manage it. And then in addition, the second from last bullet there, the server management tools, this is a new web-based remote UI that we're building. And the screenshot there sort of in the bottom left is of that. And essentially what that was we heard a lot of feedback on server core about how, you're telling me to use remote GUIs to management, and that's all great and wonderful. But there's a lot of things that I can't do with a remote GUI. There's no remote equivalent, like control panel network. How do you use a UI to change your network configuration? There's no way to do that. And so really what this server management toolset was built around was initially filling all those gaps. So we have a web-based remote UI that lets you configure your network, that lets you get a remote view like task manager, so you can get a quick view of the performance of the system, and if there's a process consuming too many resources, you can go ahead and kill it. And then we started adding more and more of the MMC snap-ins in there. So there's event viewer functionality in that, there's firewall functionality, there's Windows Update, there's a bunch of tooling, and we're going to continue to add that to that. This is actually hosted in Azure. It is free, so you just have to have an Azure subscription, but you don't get charged for any usage of this. And you deploy a gateway on-prem, and that gateway is basically your proxy between your Azure subscription and the UI up there and the machines on-prem. And that gateway handles all the requests and then uses PowerShell and WMI to manage the servers in your environment. And so that's really our way of trying to improve the remote GUI management experience, because, as I said, we've heard a lot of feedback on the server core experience, so we're trying to make that even better for server core as well as Nano Server, since Nano Server doesn't have that RDP capability. And this does work with 2012, 2012 R2, and Server 2016, as well as all of the installation options. So you can point it at a server with a GUI installation, you can point it at server core, you can point it at Nano Server. Now, talk some about Nano Server being an application platform. And so, as I mentioned, it's really about born in the cloud applications, things written to those cloud patterns. So there is a subset of Win32 available in Nano Server. I mentioned .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. We also have support for a lot of the popular open source application frameworks. So we've got some blogs on the Nano Server blog about installing Node.js, Python, and others all install on top of Nano Server. So if you have apps written to those, you can host them on top of a Nano Server container. Then we have package management, or OneGit, that allows you to download and install whatever packages you might need, as well as PowerShell and PowerShell desired state configuration. Now, unlike Server Core, Nano Server has a full developer experience. With Server Core, essentially what we did was we posted a list of APIs on MSDN and said, these are the APIs available. And that was really up to the developer to make sure they stayed within that boundary, that set of APIs, and didn't try and call an API that wasn't available. And so it wasn't a great developer experience. It made it difficult for developers to really target Server Core. But with Nano Server, we've actually created a Visual Studio template. And so you can actually go download that, and then in Visual Studio you can do new projects like Nano Server, and then as you're using Visual Studio you get that full design time experience and IntelliSense and everything. So as you start typing an API, it's going to autocomplete, and it's only going to autocomplete, for the APIs that are available to you as a developer. And then if you load up existing code and copy it into that template, if you're calling an API that doesn't exist in Nano Server, you'll get that little red error squiggle under that particular API. Then we also have some tools you can use. There's a Nano Server API scan, so you can scan an existing app. It will tell you what APIs it's using that don't exist in Nano Server, as well as in many cases suggest replacements. And then we do have full remote debugging experience. So we've made it much easier to target Nano Server as a developer and to get your apps running on top of it. Now, it all sounds great. Lots of improvements I've talked about there. So really, what are the results? How different is Nano Server from Server Core? So on the footprint side, drivers loaded, there's a few less drivers, 73 compared to 98. Services running, there's 25 services compared to 44 out of the box on Nano Server. Then ports open, 12 versus 30. So again, that reduced attack surface. There's less running by default, fewer ports open, fewer ways for the attackers to try to get into your systems. Now, as far as resource utilization goes, process count 21 compared to 26, boot I/O is 108 to 306, and kernel memory is 61 megs compared to 139 megabytes. So, even when you do have to reboot because you've installed something new or there's been a patch or something, it's much smaller and it's going to load much faster and get you back into production more quickly. And this all helps on the container side of things, where a Nano Server container is much faster than a server core container. Then for deployment improvements, installation time is about 40 seconds for Nano Server compared to 5 minutes for server core. We've done some things to optimize the install experience. You build an image offline that you put your drivers and everything in, so it doesn't have to go through the plug and play process. We've also moved some settings in the unattend to an offline section, so you can actually set your computer name offline with Nano Server. So there's no more boot assist prepped image, have unattend apply all your settings to it, and then it reboots again. We've eliminated that second reboot. So on first boot, everything gets applied and you come up and are actually running it on the network as you want it configured. So that helps reduce the setup time, allows you to quickly and easily provision new images for your DevOps type scenarios. And as far as disk footprint, this is really where the big savings is. Server core is almost 5.5 gigabytes. Nano Server is 460 megabytes. There's a little bit of overhead in a VHD, which adds a whole 20 megabytes to a Nano Server image compared to nearly a gigabyte in a server core image. So you can see, we've removed a lot of things, which again is why you have to manage it all remotely. Now, there is a recovery console available in Nano Server. So if you do have VM Connect access or keyboard, mouse, or keyboard and display access, mouse isn't going to do you much. There's a text mode recovery console. So if you have used the remote tools and broken your networking, you can actually go into the recovery console, fix your networking. Maybe you mistyped your IP address, maybe you enabled a firewall rule that's blocking your remote management tools. You can go fix those sorts of things in the recovery console, and then you can go back to using the remote management tools to manage your system. And then this slide, as I mentioned, has links to some more information. We have a pretty comprehensive deployment guide on TechNet, the blog I mentioned earlier. We have a bunch of videos on Channel 9. We have various links you can use. There's a TechNet forum as well as a section in the Windows Server user voice for Nano Server. And then those remote server management tools that I mentioned, the new GUI, there's a blog on how to get started with that. It is in preview right now, but you can sign up for it and kick the tires and give us feedback on that, as well as the final link there is a general remote management user voice area for Windows Server, so you can give us feedback on any of the remote management tools, including those new server management tools. Then I think it's back to you, Andy.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. It's a lot of good-looking stuff, a lot of new, exciting stuff coming out on the Nano Server front there, definitely. So, real quick, wanted to talk about Altaro VM backup just for a slide here, real quick, and we're going to be getting to the Q&A here. Kind of give Andrew a chance here to start looking through some of the questions that have been asked already. But basically, Altaro VM backup version 7, we just came out with version 7 back here in January, and we really focus on 3 main things with our backup application. We want it to be efficient, we want it to be easy to use, get you up and running quickly. We want you to have full control of your backup. So even though we focus on ease of use, we want you to have the features that you most look for in a backup application. So you can manage or monitor backups across all your Hyper-V and VMware hosts from a single pane of glass. We've got a new augmented inline deduplication feature that we just added in version 7 that we've had some great storage savings results with. We've got some more information on that out at our website. And I'm always proud of our support team. We don't do tiered support at Altaro. When you call our support guys, you're going to get a product expert that owns your issue from start to finish. And again, we were built specifically for the SMB and the mid-market space. So if you're interested in more information, again, about that product, www.altaro.com, and we've got all kinds of information for you there. So, I mentioned the augmented inline deduplication. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this so we can get to the Q&A, but I mentioned we've got some significantly lower storage requirements as a result of using this deduplication. As a result, you get faster backups. It's not taxing on server performance due to the way that we do it. And, we do it inline, so you're only sending the bits across the wire that actually need to go across the wire. So we don't do post-process dedupe because we don't want you to have to send, data across the wire that's just going to get deduped later. So again, more information on that out at altaro.com. And just some more links there, and that's just a screenshot of our dashboard. As you can see, the UI is pretty clean. We really focus on it being easy to use and easy to figure out where you need to go to do certain things. You can download a 30-day full feature trial at altaro.com/download. We also have a free version out there as well. That's free for 2 VMs forever if you're interested in that option as well. Now I think it's time for our Q&A here. So we've already gotten some great questions while Andrew was talking about, kind of giving us an introduction to Nano Server. Again, if you have any questions about Nano Server, use cases, setup questions, anything that you can think of, Andrew is a great resource here for all your Nano Server questions. Again, there's a questions form right there in the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to start asking away, and we will start going through the questions here. So first question on our list here is, it's a question that I get quite frequently when I'm talking with IT pros out there about Nano Server, and whether or not we'll be able to set up Nano Servers that are also domain controllers. So I mean, will we at some point be able to install the Active Directory role on top of Nano Server?
So that is a great question, and just like you, it's something I get all the time. And actually, if you go to that user voice link I mentioned earlier, it's usually the top vote-getter on the Nano Server area. So Nano Server, as I mentioned when I was talking to the slides, we start out very much focused on the cloud scenarios, and so that's what we've been working towards, a small container runtime, Hyper-V host, those sorts of things. So it is something that, like I said, we're getting a lot of requests for, and we're talking with the Active Directory team. We hope to enable this at some point, but I don't have a firm timeline that I can share at this point.
Gotcha. I think back to your introductory slide and trying to, spent many years trying to make Windows smaller.
Right.
When I started my career, I was big into Linux, and I really spent a lot of time just trying to get the OS as skinny as possible,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really cool that Microsoft is trying to do that same thing here with Nano Server. And when I think about the benefits, smaller attack surface, fewer reboots due to patching, I think AD would be a fantastic role for that use case. Nano Server really lends itself well to that. And maybe it's worth mentioning user voice. I'm still surprised at the amount of people that don't know about user voice. So I mean, if you really feel strongly about a feature, anybody can go out to user voice and vote for a particular feature, right, Andrew?
That is correct. And we do monitor that, and you'll see that, we've replied to some of the posts up there and some of the things people asked for, before we shipped Server 2016, we got into Server 2016. So it's definitely one of the inputs that we use to determine what we should be working on.
Yep, good stuff. So the next question I have here centers around anti-malware. So you mentioned that there's anti-malware capabilities baked into Nano Server. So how is it possible to use that option? To my knowledge, it's just kind of there and working by default. Is that correct?
That is, that's correct on server core. So on Nano Server, it's not actually installed by default. So you have the option to include Windows Defender when you build your image, your Nano Server image or not.
Gotcha.
If you include it, then it's going to be sitting there running and logging things to the event log, and automatically, going out and updating its signatures and things like that.
Okay, gotcha. So it follows that just enough OS mentality.
Correct.
And that you want something, you can install it into your
Right.
image.
Right.
Perfect.
If you decide you don't need it in your environment, you don't have to use it. If you decide you want to use a third party instead, we have been reaching out to various ISVs about, getting their versions of tools, obviously Altaro for a backup and others for anti-malware and antivirus kind of solutions.
Okay, perfect. So to expand on that question a little bit, Nano Server being as lean as it is, have you guys seen any significant performance hits when it comes to using those anti-malware services?
Well, if you're using it for a clustered file server, you're going to want to put some exceptions in, much like you would on any other file server, depending on what it's doing on the system. Anti-malware is going to have an impact if you're putting a lot of files on and off the box.
Okay.
So you will see a similar sort of performance hit you would see on server with desktop or server core.
Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary, basically.
Nothing out of the ordinary, no.
Okay, perfect. So next question we have here is around the server management utilities. So SMT has, so basically the question is, can you do everything with SMT that you can with PowerShell when you're attempting to manage Nano?
Yes. Everything in SMT is built on top of PowerShell and WMI, so it's all things that you can do, remotely with PowerShell from the command line.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Yes. So the goal is that for the SMT tools, is that it should all be things you can script up and automate if you wanted to. So
okay.
We've actually put some new WMI providers in the Server 2016 to enable some of the capabilities that SMT does. So one of the things it does have is remote device management. If you use Device Manager MMC in Server 2012 R2 or even Server 2016, it's a local only UI. But we've added a new WMI provider for device management, and so that's what SMT uses. And so then you can remotely use, whatever you use to talk WMI to do the same things it can do.
Okay, yeah, good deal. So, when it comes to PowerShell and new functionality for management, I've seen this a little bit on the Hyper-V side, but I'm curious whether it's the same on the Nano Server side. So it seems like there's this mentality inside of Microsoft where new features hit PowerShell first, and it takes a little bit of time for them to get incorporated into the GUI. Would that be pretty accurate for Nano Server and SMT as well?
There's definitely some of that depending on the feature and sort of what kind of user or administrator the feature is targeted at. Whether it's something that's going to be used at scale across a lot of machines, then definitely PowerShell is the thing that we try and enable first, because most of the UIs are single machine UIs, and so we try and enable that multi-machine environment, that automation for large-scale deployments first, and then build a UI on top of it. I would say we definitely, and with SMT, then the view is to layer the UI on top of that WMI and PowerShell implementation. So yes, I would think you're going to see a similar with some of the new capabilities coming in that will be available in Nano Server.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only reason I ask is because there's always the guys out there that want to be on the bleeding edge of new features.
Right.
And they're often surprised when it's a PowerShell only option, but it makes sense when you think about the development methodology that you guys employ, so I always like to point that out to people that are looking for some of the new features.
Right. Yep.
So, okay, the next question we have here is around WSL. They're wondering if WSL will eventually get into Nano Server and whether or not that would replace OpenSSH from GitHub, whether that's an eventuality or not.
So it's not something we've looked at too much, because the WSL is really about, in Windows Client, is really about enabling developers to use a Windows desktop for developing cross-platform kind of things and things like that. It's not so much about remote management or running Linux type apps on top of it. I'm not sure what the developer scenario in Nano Server would be, but this is an interesting, I think this is really about using it for management instead of, say, PowerShell and remote PowerShell. So that's an interesting angle that we hadn't considered.
Okay, so maybe like in a use case where you've got a historically Linux administrator, maybe they just want some familiar feeling tools to manage Nano as well. That could be an use case, yeah.
That is interesting, yes. So yes, I will. So to answer the question, there isn't a plan at this point to include it, but this is an interesting use case, and if others are interested in that, please go to user voice and put this in and vote on it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So our next question here centers around iSCSI, and just simply, is it possible to connect iSCSI targets from Nano Server?
So you can use to connect remotely to iSCSI, but you cannot make it an iSCSI host.
Gotcha. So like I think in the use case of Nano being a Hyper-V host, being able to connect it to an iSCSI target across the storage fabric. I mean, just using the initiator piece of it.
Correct. You can use the initiator, but you cannot use the target on Nano Server.
Gotcha. Okay. The next question here is about licensing, which is everyone's favorite topic.
Yes, exactly.
So the question is, from a licensing perspective, is it possible to use Nano Server with standard 2016 plus SA, or is it only data center edition with SA? So
obviously, the person that posted this question has been reading our licensing information, because the thing I did not mention when I was going through it is Nano Server, we talked about it being an installation option, but it is an installation option of the standard and data center. So either of those includes Nano Server. And then the SA piece of this is Nano Server is a CBB release, which is current branch for business. So we'll get updated a couple of times a year. There'll be a new release. And because of that, it does require software assurance or SA.
Okay.
Server with a desktop and Server Core are both LTSBs or long-term servicing branches for Server 2016. And so what that means is you get the 5+5 or 10 years of support and servicing. And you won't get new features or functionality. You basically get quality and security fixes over that lifetime. Whereas Nano Server, you're going to get those same types of fixes, but then every 6 to 12 months, there'll be a new build that you have to move forward to.
Okay, it almost like a rolling release type of mentality.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the client releases, where there's a new build, a new CBB build that you can deploy, and then it will, on the client side, a new one comes out, you start getting the pop-ups about there being a new build. On Nano Server, you won't get those. It's completely controlled by the admin. Obviously, we don't have UI, but the admin will have to download the new build and deploy that. But essentially, the way CBB works is you can be up to 2 behind. So, Nano Server came out as CBB1, CBB2 will come out. You can decide to skip that one if you want. When CBB3 comes out, you'll have a buffer there where you'll have to move forward to CBB3, because CBB1 will stop getting security fixes.
Okay, makes sense. So with that in mind, from if I'm an administrator and I'm managing Nano Server, when it comes to conducting those upgrades, what does that process look like for your run-of-the-mill admin?
So the process for Nano Server today is you do have to create and deploy a new image. So again, because Nano Server is so small, we've stripped out much of what the upgrade and setup engine uses. So it is roll out a new image. And so we do support cluster rolling upgrades. So if you've clustered your machines, you can take one node out of the cluster, put the new image on it, and join it back into the cluster. If you're using a container, you'd build a new container for your app and deploy that new version.
Okay, and yeah, because the image itself is so small, I mean, the deployment really doesn't take that long.
No, it doesn't.
And my favorite thing about cluster-aware upgrading is it's easily scriptable.
Yes. Yep.
So I mean, if you're running, I don't know, I'll use like a 6-host Hyper-V cluster as an example. Easy to script that process if you want to.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and just to make sure we captured the answer to the question, yes, you can use it with standard or data center plus SA.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. So the next question I have here kind of comes back to that whole iSCSI question. So we know that we can use iSCSI initiators with Nano Server to connect to a storage fabric. What about MPIO? Is MPIO involved? Is that a feature that's allowed in Nano Server as well?
MPIO is supported on Nano Server, but only with the inbox DSM.
Okay, so no custom DSMs then?
Correct. Those aren't supported yet.
Okay, gotcha. So it sounds like that's in the works then, for the vendor DSMs?
It's definitely something that we're working with the storage team on and that we want to enable, but again, I don't have a timeline for that.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let me scroll down here and take a look at it. We've gotten a lot of good questions here, so keep them coming, everyone. We've got a little while yet for Q&A, so let me look here. So I got a question here that says, it's kind of a comment and a question. So while less than 500 megabytes, it's really great for a server OS. They're wondering for containers. They still feel like it's quite a bit of overhead. Is there any plans on trimming it down further for container situations?
Yes, that is something that we are looking at doing, and actually sort of our focus going forward for the next probably few CBBs is optimizing the container scenarios. And so there's some capabilities that are included in the Nano Server image today that aren't really necessary for your sort of core container scenarios. You know, container is not something that you really remotely manage and take a lot of care of. So we're looking at, you know, can we take some of the infrastructure pieces that you need in a guest and a host and make those optional so you don't need those when you're building a container.
Okay, gotcha. Next question here. So if I read it, so is Nano Server only for cloud workloads, or can we use 2012 R2? So I think what the question is, it has to do with versions of Windows Server. So like in the case of Hyper-V, I mean, would you be able to host up like a 2012 R2 VM? I wouldn't see any issues with that myself.
Yes, you can. Whatever Hyper-V supports in Server 2016, you can do with Hyper-V on top of Nano Server.
Which brings me to another question that I'm asked quite frequently. And you know, when we're talking about like storage spaces direct and Hyper-V, when it comes to feature parity, is there feature parity with Nano Server and the other editions of Server 2016 when it comes to those roles?
For those particular roles, yes.
Okay.
I would say the one thing with like S2D, since it is sort of part of the clustering feature set, the clustering commandlets are not available locally on Nano Server. You can use those remotely.
Okay, so as long as you're on a machine that has those commandlets available, you would still be able to do those things.
Correct. But like if you wanted to create a script that you ran locally on the machine, on the Nano Server machine, you know, and it needed to do something with clustering, that's not going to work because those don't exist.
Gotcha. Okay, so you would have to execute that code remotely.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Hyper-V commandlets and everything are all there local on that.
Perfect. So our next question here has to do with Nano Server Image Builder, which is a fantastic tool, by the way. I love that tool.
Great.
So when configuring static IPs using the image builder, the IP and VLAN config is not applied when the image is booted. Is it a bug, or is that the way it's supposed to be for some reason? I would guess it's probably a bug, but I figured you could confirm one way or the other.
That sounds like a bug and not something I've heard before. That should be working. So if you could go to the Nano Server TechNet forum and post that, we can look into this. love to get more details about what you're setting and where it's going wrong.
Okay, good to know. Let's see. Here's another question I get asked quite frequently. So, we've had server core and standard server editions for a while now. Now that we have Nano Server, when it comes to running a Hyper-V host on-premise, would you say that's best practice now for running Nano Server, for running Hyper-V on-premise? My personal feeling is because of the smaller attack surface, the lower overhead, and fewer reboots due to patching, I personally would say yes to that. But what's your feel on that?
I would say yes to that as well. I think the key thing there is the agents you need on your on-prem host. A lot of companies we've talked to deploy a long list of agents on all their hosts, sort of as their corporate standard. And so really the thing, not all those agents are currently available on Nano Server. Not all those agents necessarily make sense on Nano Server because of that smaller footprint, reduced attack surface, less functionality there. So it's really about analyzing those agents and what's really required and to make it fit into your environment. But yes, as much as possible, I would recommend Nano Server.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. The next question has to do with like Hyper-V snapshots on Nano Servers. Is there any difference between taking backup of Nano Server and other servers, such as like 2012 R2 Hyper-V hosts? To me, being Hyper-V is the same on Nano Server as it is elsewhere, I would say no, but I don't know if there's any subtle differences that we need to be aware of there.
I would say no, with the caveat that VSS isn't fully supported on Nano Server, so whatever backup you're using has to use the new Hyper-V backup APIs.
Right,
So
and that would be like resilient change tracking.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So that would be the difference.
Okay. So just something for people to be aware of there then.
Yep.
Monitoring. We've got a question here about monitoring. What's the best way to monitor Nano Server? So I know that Microsoft has a bunch of utilities as well. Are there like APIs and things for, like those RMM providers out there to do monitoring of Nano Servers as well?
So you could use something like System Center Operations Manager, so the Operations Manager agent's available. Performance Monitor and things like that can be used to remotely manage and monitor your Nano Server installations. This is kind of a broad question, so I'm not sure what aspect they're trying to monitor. A bunch of the sysinternal tools have also been ported over and run on top of Nano Server, so you could use those as well, depending on what you're trying to look at.
Okay, perfect. OMS, is it possible to connect Nano Server to OMS?
So the OMS agent is not available for Nano Server yet.
Okay, but it sounds like it's in the works though.
It's definitely something that we're talking to them about getting support for.
Okay. Here's another supported role question. We talked about running Active Directory on Nano, whether or not that was possible currently today. What about SQL? That seems to be another workload where people want a really trimmed down operating system.
Right. Yes, that's definitely also another pretty common ask, and it is not available for Nano Server yet. It is something it is something we've talked to the SQL team about, and they're doing some investigations and seeing how it would fit into their plans. But
okay, so that sounds like another user voice opportunity to me for folks listening. So okay. Going through the list here. Again, if people have any questions that they want answered, feel free to use the question form. NIC teaming in Nano Server. So I'm guessing this is kind of the use case of Hyper-V again. So if I have a Hyper-V host, I'm using Nano Server as the host operating system. How do I set up NIC teaming? And my gut is going to say PowerShell. What's your take on that, Andrew?
Yes, PowerShell. I would say the one thing is the LBFO NIC teaming is not supported in Nano Server. Only the new set NIC teaming that's available in Server 2016 is supported.
Okay. And yeah, I know there's a bunch of great information on set out there on the TechNet blog. It seems like I've seen a whole smattering of documentation about that recently. So yeah, that's a good answer there. Let's see. So from a use case perspective, what would be the most common workloads for Nano Server? I know you touched on this a little bit during the during the slides that you were showing earlier, but if you had to say what are the top 3 workloads that you would suggest Nano be used for?
That's a great question. I would say the top 3 are your container OS for hosting your applications. Again, sort of container OS for IIS. So if you have websites and you want to run them on a lightweight, secure OS, I would say run them in a container on top of Nano Server, and then as a virtualization host.
Okay, perfect. So when we talk about storage, this is for the next question here, kind of a storage-related question. Are all of the storage types that are supported on 2016 Core, are all of those also supported in Nano Server?
No, they are not all supported. So we have some of this in the TechNet article or TechNet guide for Nano Server. Like we mentioned earlier, it can be an iSCSI initiator, but not an iSCSI target. There are some limitations in the MPIO. Let's see, virtual fiber channels not supported. So there are some differences. Again, we sort of focused on the cloud scenarios. So
right.
a lot of it's about what you would use on in a cloud host environment.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see here. So this is kind of a specific use case here. So is Nano Server able to boot on bare metal, which I know it is, but the question is, what about boot from SAN, like over a fiber channel? Is that possible with Nano Server?
That is not currently supported on Nano Server.
Okay. Good to know, good to know. And I'm guessing that's probably a limitation in fiber channel support?
Yes, that is a limitation in some of the fiber channel support.
Okay, gotcha.
We don't have parity there on the storage side as we discussed in the last question.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, here's another very common storage question I get, especially when we're talking about virtualization hosts. What about installation on SD card? Is that a supported installation option currently?
That is not a supported installation option, no.
Okay, is that something you guys are looking at? Is that something that's commonly requested?
It is something that's commonly requested, and again, user voice if you want to keep voting for this one. So it is something we're looking at, but it's really coming down to the Windows OS does a lot more reads and writes to the device it's booted from, and trying to figure out how to certify the right level of SD card.
Gotcha.
The SD card you buy for your camera off of Amazon is probably not going to be a great thing for your servers.
Yeah, that's probably some good advice there. I can't say I would recommend that either.
Right.
So, okay. I think we've got about another 5-6 minutes of Q&A here. We've got time for a couple other questions. We've got some great questions coming in here. Let's see. So kind of a follow-up question to our one about antivirus. Is third-party antivirus required? It's not required, and I think you mentioned that you were working with some of those vendors on bringing their products to the Nano Server platform, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's not required. It's as the administrator or owner of that server, you should determine what's appropriate for the scenarios it's being used in. Defender's available, and as we mentioned, we've been talking to all the ISVs about getting their various tools and things working on top of Nano Server.
Okay, perfect. Another question here. Can I run VMs in Hyper-V on Nano Server, which itself is okay. So user has a Windows 10 host, Windows 10 machine, physical machine. They're running Nano Server as a VM on top of that platform, and then running virtual machines inside it. So nested virtualization, which is now supported in 2016, one of my personal favorite features myself. But that should be fully supported for them to do that, correct? I mean, yes. I wouldn't do it for production, but it's great for testing and lab and demonstration scenarios.
Yes, you can certainly do that.
Okay.
I've run in some of my, I think it was an Ignite session or somewhere, I did have that working. I had Nano VM running on top of my laptop, which is running Win 10, and then inside of that Nano VM, I was starting up more Nano VMs.
Yeah, that's one of my, as someone who does presentations quite frequently, it's fantastic for that. Just great.
Yep, so, it comes in very handy.
It does, and especially for training scenarios too, because I mean, it used to be you had to have some hardware lying around to test some of this stuff, and being able to nest Nano on top of Nano really helps now.
Right.
Let's see here. Can we add Nano Server to VMM 2012 R2 for management?
No, it does require VMM 2016.
Okay, gotcha.
Right.
And I'm guessing there's probably no plans to backport that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, no plans that I'm aware of. Basically, we had to do some work to port the VMM agent over to allow it to run on top of Nano Server, and that work was done for the 2016 agent.
Okay, gotcha. All right, let's see. I think we've got time for one or two more here. Let's see. Hardware acceleration. Is hardware acceleration supported in a Hyper-V nested scenario? So you got Nano Server nested as a Hyper-V host, hardware acceleration. So I know you can pass the virtualization extensions through to the VM.
Right.
I'm guessing that's what they're meaning when they say hardware acceleration.
Right, unless they're asking about, direct device access, like pass through to the GPU or something.
Yeah, I would say to the nested host you could probably do that, but not through to the, the what I would call the child virtual machine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't know that that's supported through nesting.
Gotcha.
We'd have to follow up with some Hyper-V folks for that.
Yeah, yep. Okay. So then the one other thing I wanted to touch on, Andrew, is are there any common questions that you get that we haven't addressed so far? Is there anything that you wanna talk to as a common question?
I think we've touched on the big ones. I mean, licensing definitely came up. Servicing and CBB came up. Those are probably the top two that I generally get.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I did see one other. Go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
I was going to say if you have any top questions you get that you'd like me to answer, I'm all for it.
I think that we've covered the ones that I most commonly get. So real quick, I think the one other thing I want to touch on was around SMT, the Azure-based management tools. For somebody that's getting started with Nano Server, I think the most common concern is management. How do I manage this thing?
Right.
I know a lot of administrators, they'll see that blinking cursor on the console and be like, how do I wrap my hands around this thing, right? Well,
Right.
I always talk to them about the Azure-based management utilities. I always talk to them about, all the remote management tools that are available. For somebody that wants to get started with, they want to get started with those Azure-based tools, what are some good resources for them to get started down that road?
I would, hang on, let me go back a couple slides. I actually had the link on the slide.
Sure.
I would say the best resource is that deploy and set up server management tools link on the bottom of the slide here.
Okay. So that'll contain, that'll get started from A to B, basically.
Yes, that will take you to the blog for the server management tools, and there's a post up there about how to deploy and get started. And so it steps you through the process of getting your Azure subscription, selecting the server management tools, and downloading the gateway that you have to deploy, and helping you get that first connection set up.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, I would say one of the advantages of the server management tools is there's lots of MMCs out there that you can do remote management with, but the way you connect remotely with those is sort of inconsistent, and not everything has remote management like Device Manager. The great thing about the server management tools is you establish a connection to your server, and then all the tools are connected. You don't have to reconnect it, going between event log to firewall or whatever.
Right, right.
You establish one connection, you can use all the tools. So it makes it much easier for somebody getting started with remote management. They don't have to figure out all the remote uses of the tools.
Right, right. More streamlined experience, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, well, good. Well, so just to mention once again, if there was a question you asked today that was not answered in our Q&A session here, we always do a follow-up post on the Altaro blog that contains a recording of the webinar and a list of the Q&A with the associated answers. So be on the lookout for that in the next week or two here out at altaro.com/hyper-v. And Andrew, I want to say a big thank you to you for taking time out of your day to come talk to us about Nano Server. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to Nano Server and talk about Nano Server and share more information.
Hey, good stuff. Really appreciate it. So with that, we'll let everybody go and get back to their day. And thanks for attending, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.